We're now going to start the program with a recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم وإن تطيعوا الله ورسوله لا يلتكم من أعمالكم شيئا إن الله غفور رحيم. إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون. قل أتعلمون الله بدينكم والله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض والله بكل شيء عليم. يمنون عليك أن أسلموا قل لا تمنوا علي إسلامكم بل الله يمن عليكم أن هداكم للإيمان إن كنتم صادقين. إن الله يعلم غيب السماوات والأرض والله بصير بما تعملون. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much. We're now very fortunate to have Dr Miqdad Asaria, who will be speaking to us on the census in the Salaam Centre. What do 3 decades of demographic data tell us? Let's welcome him with salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. Whilst known to everybody, or most people in the community here, Miqdad is a health economist with extensive experience in both academic and policy-making settings. He currently holds a fellowship from the Health Foundation. He's a health economist and assistant professor at LSE. Prior to working at the LSE, he worked with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in India, the Centre for Health and Economics at the University of York, and the Department of Health in the UK. He also holds an adjunct position as an assistant professor at the Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences in Kochi, India, and a visiting position at the University of York. Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad.
Thank you so much for having me. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the census data. And what the census data means for us here at the Salaam Centre. So if you remember during 2001, I think it was around April, you were...
No, it was 2022.
It wasn't, now it's 2022. In 2001, there was a census and everybody was asked to fill in a bunch of details. And all of you put in your details into these forms. And this happens every 10 years. Every 10 years, everybody in the country has to put in their details into these forms, and they collect all of these details together, and then they let people use that data, right? And so this is done by an organization called the Office for National Statistics, and they put all of that information together, and then you can analyze that information and see what's going on in different parts of the country, okay? And so the most recent data, as I said, was in 2021. But there was a question. So every year they might change the form slightly. And so in 1991, they included a question to ask people what their ethnicity was. And that's might be quite interesting for us to see people's ethnicities and how it changed over time. And in 2001, they also started to ask people what religion they were. And this was a voluntary question, but actually more than 95% of people are filling this in. So it's more or less everybody fills it in. So what I'll do is I will talk about some details from this census data for Harrow be somewhere where you can see the screens, because there'll be lots of graphs to look at, okay? And then we can discuss a little bit. I'll give you some thoughts about what it might mean for us, and then we can maybe open up to discussion and get a sense of what do other people think, because you all will know much more about what the data might mean for us. I can tell you what the data is, and then you can start thinking about what you think it means for us, yeah? So I'm going to look at the census data for Harrow. Now, this is a picture of London and Harrow within London. Now, obviously, people that come here are not only from Harrow, they're also from the surrounding areas like Hillingdon and Brent and other places. But we're going to focus on Harrow for now, because that's the core of where we are. And then we can think about what we would do to expand our focus, right? So let's look first at the overall population of Harrow and what's been happening. So you can see this is starting from 1981, 1991, 2001, 2011, 2021. You can see in the beginning from 1981, 91, 2001, nothing really much was changing. And then suddenly in 2011 and 2021, the populations increased by about 50 or 60,000, right? So now the population of Harrow is 261,300, according to the census, okay? So 250,000 people. It's kind of like a small city in most parts of the country, like that's what we're talking about. And what does this population look like? So I've broken it down into different age groups. And so I've started from 0 to 4, so like preschool, then school age, then kind of young adults, working age, and then retirement age. And the bars go from light blue to dark blue, showing that population in the different census years. And so we can see here that actually there's been a big increase from 1981 to 2021 in that kind of working age population, the 25 to 64-year-olds. That's been going up and up quite a lot. And the other thing that you can see, maybe if you look closely, is that the over 65s are suddenly starting to go up as well now in Harrow, right? So, but really the bulk of the population is 25 to 65, yeah? And then we can think about, like, what are these people doing? Like, do they have jobs? Are they retired? Are they doing other things? And we can see, again, a similar pattern that we have this category in the census called economically active. That means people who are either looking for work or are working. And you can see that's gone up quite a lot over time, and probably because the people of that age, the 25 to 65-year-olds, are increasing a lot. And you can see the number of people retired has also gone up quite a lot. And the other thing you can see is that the number of people doing other, so this other category includes people who are like staying at home and looking after the house and children. And you can see that's dropped a lot, because now it's very difficult for, this is particularly women who are staying at home, and it's very difficult to actually manage without both of people in a couple working anymore. And so you can see that's almost disappeared now as a category. So those are just general trends in Harrow. Then we can start looking at who are these people based on where were they born, right? So one of the questions asks you, where were you born? And so we can look at how many people were born in UK and Ireland over time. And in 1981, more than 80% of the population of Harrow was born in the UK. By 2021, that's less than 50%. So now, less than 50% of the population who live in Harrow were born somewhere else, okay? And we can also look at, for those people who were born somewhere else, when did they come to the country, right? So you can see very few of them came before 1951, and then 51 to 60, there was a few more, then 61 to 70, then you could see probably a lot of like East Africans came from 71 to 80, 81 to 90, and then towards the end, the numbers are going up and up. And you can see this is probably when the European Union was formed, and then they included more of the Eastern European countries, and so that's been expanding quite a lot. And you can see in between there were various things that happened. There was Iraq war, there's wars in Somalia, there's problems in Afghanistan, there's various events, and every time one of these things happens, refugee populations start to arrive from places where there are various troubles, right? This is the same graph, but showing you numbers of people rather than percentages. So you can see now, you know, in the last 10 years, 50,000 people came to Harrow who were born in other countries. Yeah? And just something about the European Union, just to give you a reminder that those blue countries became the European Union in 1994, and everybody from those countries were able to cross borders and work wherever they wanted. And so there was a little bit of people, and these are basically Western European countries, and so they were able to come and work in England. And then in 2004, it opened up to some of those Eastern European countries, so those orange countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, etc. And so those people started also being able to come to England, and we saw lots of people from particularly Poland coming to England during that time. And then it expanded further to Bulgaria and Romania in 2007. And then finally, in 2020, we had Brexit, where England left the European Union. And partly it was because they were worried about all of these people coming from Europe. That was one of the reasons why they were arguing to leave, right? So that's kind of one of the factors that was happening was Eastern Europeans or Western Europeans coming. Yeah.
If you just go back.
Yeah.
So just looking at 2011 to 21. So are you saying that the majority of the people, you're saying it's Eastern from Europe, perhaps?
It may be. So we'll see a little bit further down where we can try and understand. But at the moment, we'll talk about this a little bit later as well. But at the moment, we only have data for one variable at a time. So we know either where they were born or when they came. In the next few months, we'll have multivariate data, so we can see when did Polish people come, when did Indians come, etc. But for now, we have to do a bit more detective work to get a sense of what's going on.
Sure. Okay, it was 11 to 21. I thought it was less than that, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So this report is an evolving thing, is it? The parts of the report keep on coming up?
The data is coming out slowly. So this is just, I've created these graphs from the data that's out there. And so we can, and there's many other variables we could look at as well, but I've just picked a few of them which are of interest to us. So we could do a lot more analysis, and as this data becomes more available, and Mebu Uncle's been doing a lot of work with the data, so he'll be able to tell you much more about what's possible. So now I looked at, so these people born outside the UK, where did they come from? And I've just picked the top few places because there's a list of hundreds of places, right? And so, and again, you start with the very light bars are in 1981, and the dark blue are in 2021, right? So you can see that in the last 20 years, there's been this big influx from other Europe, like not Western Europe, so Eastern European countries, yeah? And that's really shot up in the last 10 years, right? You can see that this other category includes all of those other countries. Those are mostly Muslim countries, like, you know, all of the Middle Eastern countries and various African countries. And then you can see that actually the population born in India is going up quite a lot, right? And it's going up quite fast over time as well. This is again the same graph. And then if we think about Brexit, nothing yet in the data suggests that people from Europe are going away. I mean, maybe in the next census we might see some kind of effect of that. But and then I've just broken it down even further into, for just this year, some of the countries where people have come from. For just in 2021, looking at the population now, where are people born, right? And you can see some interesting things, like this is for Harrow, not for England, right? So for Harrow, there's double as many Sri Lankans as Pakistanis. That I thought was quite interesting. There's similar number of people from Romania as from East Africa, yeah? And the highest number of people are Indian, born in India. Right? I mean, not including born in UK, right? So for all the people born outside of the UK, the highest number are the people who are born in India, okay? And so that's where they were born, but there's also people like me who were born in the UK but might not consider themselves white British as ethnicity, right? So we can also look at that. What about how many people are white British? So you can see in 1991, when they first started recording ethnicity, there was lots of white British people, and that's going down and down over time quite quickly, yeah? So, in 1991, 2/3 of the people were white British. This is self-declared, what you consider yourself. When you fill in the form, you say what you are. Nobody, right? So 2 out of every 3 people in Harrow used to be white British in 1991. By 2021, it was only 1 in 5 people in Harrow were calling themselves white British, right? And so there's this idea of white flight that many of you will be familiar with, that when white people see other people coming into areas where they live, they don't like it and they move to other places. And as that starts to happen, that process reinforces itself, and then they feel more and more isolated, and their culture is less dominant, and then they can't have their pubs and whatever else, and they just kind of leave the area faster and faster, right? And so we're seeing something like that going on in Harrow, it seems, yeah? And then if we look at the non-white British, what's the ethnicity there? And you can see the big increase are Indians, and now there's more people who consider themselves Indian in Harrow than who consider themselves white British, right? So that's the biggest ethnic group in Harrow. And the Eastern Europeans are growing fast as well, or have grown fast as well. So the white other are typically Eastern European, right? And you can see there's a few other groups. There's now more Africans and Caribbeans, for example. So there's other things going on there. So by 2021, 1/3 of Harrow residents were Indian, 10% were Eastern European, and only 1 in 5 were white British. Yeah. And we can also look at what languages people speak as their main language at home. Yeah. So that's kind of another kind of. And English is the most popular main language. That 67% of Harrow speak English as the main language at home. But if we look at non-English languages, you can see that the biggest language actually is Romanian, with about 7 to 8% of the population. The second biggest is Gujarati with about 7%, and the third is Tamil with about 4%. Right? So, and then everything else is there's bits of Arabic and Farsi and Urdu and other things, but really it's Tamil, Romanian, and Gujarati. Right? And then we look at the religion data, and we're looking at the numbers of people in each of the groups here, and we can see that the Hindu population has grown quite a lot over time, and the Hindus are now more than the Muslims, or they have always been, and they're still more than the Muslims. And the Muslim population is also growing quite a lot. And when we look in percentage terms, the Christian population is falling very fast, despite all of those Eastern Europeans coming in. The Jewish population is almost disappeared altogether. But the Muslim population is growing the fastest, right? And if we look at the age, like we look at within each religion, what ages are people, right? So with each of these blocks shows within a religion what proportion of people are from the different age groups. So the light ones are the 0 to 4-year-olds, and the dark blue ones are over 65s, right? And so we can see one interesting thing is in terms of numbers, there's the same number of school-age children who are Muslim, Christian, and Hindu in Harrow. So if you go to a school, you'd expect to have equal numbers of Muslim, Christians, and Hindus there, right? And you look at the Jewish population, more than half of them are over 65. Whereas if you look at the Muslim population, actually there's quite a lot of Muslims who are 5 to 15 years, more than in any other of the groups, you can see, right? So the Muslim population is much younger than the other populations, right? So what does this mean? So just to remind you some of those things that we saw, there was a huge and steady growth of the born in India population and the population born in other countries, right? And the other countries were basically the Muslim countries who are like troubled countries where there was some wars or other kind of things going on. There's also a big recent increase in people born in Eastern Europe, and those were particularly Romanians and Polish. The white British population has dropped from 66% in 1991 to 20% in 2021. And obviously, if we had data from 1981, that 66% would have been probably even much higher, right? So Harrow now is 30% Indian, 20% white British, and 10% Eastern European, right? And the Christian and Jewish populations are falling very quickly, and the Muslim and Hindu populations are growing. There's more Hindus than Muslims in Harrow, but the Muslims are growing at a faster pace at the moment, or they have been up till now. And there's equal numbers of Muslim, Hindu, and Christian school-age children. And the majority of the Jewish population is over 65, right? So they're almost, the numbers are going down and they're aging, the ones who are remained here. So what do we think is going to happen next in this data? So maybe the European population is going to stop growing in terms of people coming from Europe because of Brexit, and that's going to make it harder and less attractive for people from European countries to come. The Indian-born and other-born populations will depend on what the country does in terms of immigration policy, right? So my guess would be that the Indian population will keep growing. Now they're desperate to find people to work in the NHS, etc. We have an Indian Prime Minister, we have an Indian Home Secretary. So my guess is that that's likely to increase. But they also want to be very strict on immigration. So they seem to be very strict on asylum seekers, refugees, and those are typically the Muslim immigrants who come in that form, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. And it's important to think about who are these people who are coming. And so the Indian-born population and the Eastern European-born population, they're not escaping something at home. They're coming here for good job opportunities, right? And they're not doing like those basic jobs. They're working in big IT companies and in various things, especially the Indians who are coming here. And a lot of them want to come here, make money, and they have an intention of going back. Whether or not that will happen is another question, but they're not necessarily committed to being here forever, right? Whereas I think the Muslim refugee kind of populations, they're unlikely to go anywhere. They've escaped from situations where they may no longer have homes or anything left to go back to, right? So as this Indian-born population is growing, we also have to think about, are they going to bring the attitudes towards Muslims that are prevalent in India to Harrow as well, or not, right? And we're seeing some of this kind of discourse around what was happening in Leicester earlier in the year, and people from Harrow were very involved there, and so it's just something to keep in mind, right? So the Muslim-born population is younger than the other populations, as we saw, so it probably will increase just naturally because younger populations are more fertile and have more children for a little while. But the immigration from Muslim countries is likely to decrease, especially under the current government or even the current Labour Party, right, if they came to power. The Christian and Jewish population is likely to continue declining, and we would expect white flight from Harrow to continue. The other thing to note is the Muslim population is very ethnically diverse. So the Hindu population is mostly Indian, whereas the Muslim population is from all over the place: Somalia, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, various Arab countries, Iran, Turkey, Bangladesh, etc. There's a whole mix of things there. So it's a very diverse population. And without one group necessarily completely outnumbering any others, right? And this is specifically to Harrow, I'm saying, not England as a whole, but yeah. So here are some questions that came to my mind, right? So how will the relationship be between the Muslim community and the Indian Hindu community going forward? You know, like in Harrow, I think many of us who have like some background in East Africa have grown up with a particular type of Indian Hindu community, but that might be quite different to the Indian Hindu community who are born in India and are coming here now. So how is that relationship going to develop? How would the relationship between the Muslim community and the Eastern European population develop? Like, have we even thought about who are Romanians? What do they think of Muslims? What do we think of them? Because they are a huge group in Harrow, right? They're like 10% of the population are Romanian, more or less. So, will ethnically diverse Muslim community grow closer together and unite? Will they intermarry more? Will they do something more interesting than in previous generations? Or will they stay in their kind of separate ghettos? We haven't really talked about what's going on internally within the UK. So people can come in and out of Harrow from other places. I haven't gone into that in the data yet. So that's another question now. Are people coming in and out of Harrow from within the UK, from other parts? So what might this mean for the Salaam Centre? So I think there are plenty of these ethnically homogeneous Muslim community centres in the area already, and they cater primarily to the needs of the older generation who want somewhere to pray, other people who speak the same language, look like them, are from their same villages or countries, etc. Right? But that's fine, and that serves a purpose. But in Harrow now, we have like this very young and very ethnic diverse Muslim community. So is there a space, are there spaces for those things to be nurtured, you know, for those relationships to grow, for that kind of intermingling of culture to create a new and interesting British Islam? And you're seeing some of that in places like Brent nearby. They're doing a lot more of this, and you see places like the Rumi's Cave and places where they are having much more of these kind of quite interesting mixed populations. So we really need to think about how to positively engage with the fast-growing Indian Hindu community in Harrow, because I think we probably have overlooked that. I think when we talk about Salaam Centre being open and reaching out to the wider community, often in our head we think the wider community is the white British people, but the white British people are leaving Harrow. They're not here anymore. The wider community is the Romanians and the Hindus and the Poles, and that's who are really our wider communities, right? And of course, there's other things we could learn from the census data. So I've just showed you a snapshot. There's many more things you can talk about in terms of what jobs people are doing, where they're living, and so there's all sorts of different things, right? And there's also sort of different areas we could think about. Maybe focusing just on Harrow isn't enough. We need to go a bit broader, think about some of the surrounding areas. We can think about political geography. So we could split this into Harrow East and Harrow West and start looking at what's likely to happen in Harrow East and Harrow West. You know, like Harrow East is already voting Conservative. As more and more professional Indians come in, is Harrow West also going to become likely to be Conservative, etc., right? We can also look at electoral wards where councillors are elected and what's going on in specific areas. And when the multivariate data come out in a few months, we can start looking at two things at the same time, you know, like, so how many of the Indians are Muslim, or those kind of questions, right? So let's open up to questions and say, what would you interpret from this data?
Thank you very much for the presentation, Miqdad. Just one or 2 points. What do you think the impact of the ongoing Ukraine conflict will have on this in terms of in-migration from Eastern Europe? Secondly, the Salaam Centre seems to be in a uniquely privileged position in dealing with other communities within Harrow, because looking at the language data you've given, it's not Indian, it's Gujarati presence within Harrow that we're looking at. And it's an intra-Gujarati dynamic that needs to be looked at in terms of how effectively Gujarati communities reach out to one another. Because you also have a significant Tamilian Hindu population within that Hindu group that you're looking at, and they have very different dynamics. We don't tend to have the Modi problem as much down south. Just wondered what your thoughts on the...
Thank you. So the Ukraine is interesting, and I don't know how many Ukrainians are coming to the UK. I don't think the UK has been particularly generous towards the Ukrainians. And then again, where will they settle in the UK, right? So we see this particular phenomenon of there being so many Romanian people in Harrow. But that's not a UK-wide phenomenon. The Romanians don't outnumber the Poles 5-1 in England, but it's a Harrow phenomenon. So I think what's going on locally might be quite different to what goes on nationally. In terms of your point about the Indians, so I think it's quite interesting when we get the multivariate data to think about, are the Gujarati speakers the Indians, or are they the East Africans who are already here? And are the Indians considering themselves English speakers or Hindi speakers? Or so I know when I've been taking my daughter to these library rhyme times, most of the Indians there speak Hindi to each other rather than Gujarati, which is quite different to how it was 30 or 40 years ago. So it would be interesting to see that. Is it lots of people coming from Gujarat, or are they coming from other places, right? So I guess the other thing is that a lot of the Tamil-speaking community may also be Sri Lankans and Muslim Sri Lankans at that, and so there's a Sri Lankan mosque down the road as well, so worth keeping in mind.
You didn't mention anything about people saying no religion is their religion, yeah?
Yeah.
And that's a growing trend, yeah? I mean, everywhere in the country, yeah? And also in Harrow, so we may have to deal with, we are going to be intermix, yeah? With other communities, yeah? People saying no religion, yeah?
Yeah, so here we have no religion in Harrow, right? So you can see the last, I don't know if the slides... So if you look in the last group, so if you look around the country, actually at this data, you will see that no religion is growing massively around the country. A lot of Christians are becoming non-Christian, not unreligious, right? But that doesn't seem to really be going on anywhere near the same rate in Harrow. So in Harrow, the number of people who are non-religious, or the proportion, is fairly constant over time. It's increasing a little bit, but I think largely because the Christians who are left in Harrow are probably Eastern Europeans who are not interested in no religion. The ones who are non-religious are probably the ones who are moving out, the white flight. Muslims and Hindus don't seem to be leaving their religions at the same rates as Christians are, so far at least. So, but I might be wrong. But so again, when we get the multivariate data, we might know something more.
Islam is quite an old religion, but how come in Harrow, they're the Muslims, most of them are in their 15,
Yeah.
in 15, that group. So
because
how
the
is that
Muslims
supposed
that
to
came
get
to Harrow,
to
they
here?
came mostly from other countries. They weren't like English people who became Muslim. They were people who came from other countries, like your dad, and they, and our grandparents, and they came here, and then they had children, and their children had children, right? And so their population is slightly different to the local English people who are much older, right? And so normally people who come, it's not old people who move countries, it's younger people who move countries, and then they have young children, and that's why our Muslim population is quite young.
Why would the youngest move and not the oldest?
It's quite hard to move when you're old because you don't want to leave everything behind. Normally you move because you want to find a nice job somewhere new, you're excited about going to a new place, so you move country.
Didn't you just take your possessions and leave?
Yeah, but do you see old people leaving? Yeah.
Miqdad, thanks very much. Do you mind going back to the slide that just had? There was a percentage slide. Can you move one back? Okay, so these are numbers, I think, yeah. So from the Salaam Centre narrative perspective, 15 years ago, the narrative was that we have 15,000 Jews in Harrow. We've got 30,000 Muslims, 60,000 Hindus, and about 110,000 Christians at that time. So I'm just trying to just see what the figures are. Would it be fair to say that Muslims have gone up to about 40, no, there's still, yeah, about 40,000? And not on this slide, but I read somewhere else that there are about 40,000 Muslims now.
Maybe there's a better one. Is there one before this? Yeah, maybe this one is better. So we can look at the dark blue ones, yeah.
Yeah, 40,000. And Hindus have gone up to, you say, about a third of 280,000 population now. It wasn't third, it was 30%, I think.
30%, yeah.
Yeah, so nearly 70,000 Hindus now.
So you can see that they're nearly 70,000 there, exactly. And Christians are about 80,000.
Yeah, and Jews have dropped from 15,000 to about 12?
Yeah,
about, yeah.
Insignificant,
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Salaam Centre. Thank you for the presentation. Just one of the earlier slides there, when you looked at the growth in the age categories, so you had sliced the school age and then the beyond school age. What's quite interesting for me is it's the beyond school age that has really shot up. So migrants without children, looking at the commute into London, but not a corresponding young growing population coming up, because the school population looked fairly stagnant over the last 20 to 30 years. Any further insights into that? Because it bucks the trend in the way the national demography is, right?
So I can't say anything from the data, but my guess would be that a lot of people, like these kind of young professional IT worker types, would be single people who are traveling over. So they may not be coupled up, or they may have partners back home and families back home, but they're here working for a few years, or at least starting in that way. And so they come out of their IIT or wherever it is, and then just come straight over. And so maybe we'll see them settling down here, or maybe they want to go back or move on to somewhere better. That's the other thing, right? Like these high-flying people may want to shift to Buckinghamshire or something, you know, as they...
Are you suggesting the Salaam Centre moves?
So a lot of them are probably, you know, graduates have just graduated in India or whatever, and they've come across.
Salaam, thank you for the talk. I guess it also looks interesting that that group that's getting bigger, the 24 to, do you say 65? Yeah. It sort of suggests people are sticking around and staying within Harrow, potentially. Those who grew up potentially staying. Do we have the data yet about like net wealth for these populations, or is that to come potentially?
So that's not something that they ask in the census, how wealthy you are, but you can get some kind of clue by getting the type of occupation, and you can also get whether they rent their houses or they've bought their houses. So you get some clues from various things in there. But I haven't looked at that yet. And once again, I think some of these questions, when we have specific questions, we can start looking at, you know, amongst certain populations, how many of them are in different categories. Because if you do everything all at once, you'll just end up sitting here all night looking at endless graphs, right? We've already seen too many more graphs than most people probably wanted to see, right? And so, so yeah, once we get some interesting questions, we can drill down and look at them for sure.
Thank you. It does bring out a couple of key issues which we have to think about, which is fine. Is it possible from the census data or the granular releases to work out what is happening within 10 miles of the center rather than borough-wise?
It's definitely possible. It's just more work, you know, and deciding where is the right boundary, and then also the amount of details they give you changes depending on the kind of area that you're looking at. And so they don't want to reveal how you filled in your form. They never want somebody to be able to be identified. So if you have these big blocks of areas that you can put together, that's fine. They'll give you aggregated data for that. But if you start drawing your boundaries very precisely, and you say that I want those people who live in these 3 streets in Wembley and those 2 streets in Northwood, and then they stop allowing you to see so much information about those people anymore. And so there's a trade-off between how accurately you might, but if you just wanted to say that generally, what about in the 3 boroughs around Harrow and Harrow, how many people, you could do something like
So yeah, we could, I suppose we could approximate 5-10 miles radiuses on the same without going into any data breaches.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that there's so many mosques. If you just put in Google, just go to Harrow and then just type mosque, and you see how many mosques pop up between here and 10 miles of here, you'll probably find 100. You know, so it's not like, so I guess one of the questions is, are we competing for people, or are we offering some complementary facility to other people, or how geographically bound are we? How many car parking spaces are we going to have? Is it going to be able to accommodate people from those distances, etc.? So, yeah.
On one of your graphs or your slides, you had 30%, 20%, and 10%. So what happened to the other 40%?
So the other 40% were just spread amongst all lots of little smaller categories. So I just showed you the top 3 categories, but there were others like Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and Arabs, and they were all like 2%, 1%, but if I put them all on the page, you would have hundreds of things there to look at.
But why don't you show us the top 5?
Yeah, I could have. Yeah. You have to stop somewhere, though, isn't it?
Thanks, Miqdad. That was really interesting. I had a question about kind of related to the net wealth. I know the ONS produced some IMD statistics, and they put groups into LSOAs and they link the two. Do they normally update that following the census? Because I know they look at it in detail. And have you looked at how that's changed for Harrow in the same period? Because I think that would be quite interesting to look at together.
So as you're saying, there's this thing that the ONS creates to tell you how deprived different areas are, and they combine information about how rich people are, but also their health and their education and crime and whatever. And they split the country into little areas called LSOAs, as you said. And LSOA is like a neighborhood with about 1,500 people. So in Harrow, there would be lots of them, right? And so 200 or 300 or something like that, right? And so we can look within those at how they're changing over time. We can do that. From this census, they haven't yet produced that index, but this will be one of the inputs into that index, and it probably will come out in 2022 or 2023. But that's updated every 5 years with various other data as well. And so we could look at how are different parts of Harrow changing for sure, yeah.
Just as a top of my head guess, I would think that the Indian origin population are more homeowners than Romanians, who will be more renters. Is that data possible to extract later on?
In the next wave of data, that will be possible to look at, yeah.
So I can ask quickly. You talk about internal mobility within the UK. Is that data? Would that data be present at all?
No, Uncle can maybe answer that.
Yes, that's also possible, and they produce that data every year. I mean, internal movement also between. Yeah, they don't ask, but they do a separate survey. Yeah, every year they do a small sample survey. Yeah.
But they may not have it for Harrow specifically, right? Would they have it at local authority?
They have it
they do have it.
Local authorities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Miqdad, just coming back to this question about characterizing Indian and Romanian population, say, within Harrow, do we have, or does ONS provide data on educational attainment and whether people are coming in? So the reason I ask this is that you have very different Indian populations, say around Queensbury and Harrow Wealdstone, compared to, say, the north of Harrow, where, yes, the homeowner issue comes in, but you have very high rates of TB, you have very high rates of multiple occupancy, you have very high rates of deprivation amongst the Indian population in the south of Harrow. Firstly. Secondly, leading on from that, and from your previous presentation on COVID and mortality, what insights on mortality and ethnicity does the latest data release provide?
So on the first question, we will be able to see something about the education. So if you remember what you filled in the census form, basically every question in the census form can be analyzed. And so one of them was, what's your level of education? I think it's like GNVQ4 or above, or something, some degree equivalent. And so you don't have super fine-grained, but did you go to school? Did you do GCSEs? Did you do A-levels? And did you do something further, more or less, right? So we will be able to see that for sure. In terms of ethnicity and mortality, so of course we have this kind of micro picture of Harrow only that we've been focusing on. We could look at the whole country. And the census does ask you your self-assessed health. So you could get a sense of how healthy do people consider themselves. Now, there may be differences in how different groups of people assess themselves, right? And so it might not be the same answer that you got from, if you asked a GP how healthy are these 3 people, they might give you a different ranking of who's the healthiest and who's the least healthy than the people themselves give you. So you have to take that as it comes, yeah.
Is there, in the census, is there a place where you put how, like, is there any part which has poverty included in it? Like, to, like, see what has happened to the poverty so far in the census data?
Yeah, well, there's some things that you can use to try and understand that, like, do people have a job or not? Where do they live? Do they have a place to live or not? What kind of place do they live in? So you can try and figure it out from the census, but it's not a question. They don't ask you, are you poor or not? But you can try and be a bit of a detective and find out.
But do they ask you like any the questions that relate to poverty?
So those kind of questions relate to poverty. You know, do you have a job? Do you have a house? Those kind of stuff, right?
I guess we don't have a Shia Sunni split, do we, within the Muslim?
I don't think so, because if you remember the form, there wasn't. I mean, you could put other religion and put something.
Okay. Omar, a majority of Sri Lankans who are not Muslims are probably Buddhists rather than Hindus. Although there are Hindus, wouldn't you agree?
So the majority of persons born in Sri Lanka who are resident in the UK are from the Tamil community. And the vast majority of Tamils are either Hindu or Christian, and then thirdly Muslim. We have an interesting situation in that you have a center here, Sri Lanka Muslim Center, which has acted as a center for the settlement of the Muslim population. The Sinhalese, however, are predominantly Buddhist, virtually all Buddhist.
Just one other. So, really from the Salaam Centre perspective, Riaz here is looking with a team of people to see whether the functional areas that we chose 15 years ago are still valid today, whether we need to change. And I feel that an input within that larger team of a Hindu and a Romanian and a white British perhaps would probably add value, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely would be interesting. I don't know how much we've talked to these other. I mean, I guess if you're a school teacher or a GP in the community, or you have a business in Harrow, you probably will be noticing these changes anyway, in terms of the kind of people you're seeing day to day. But yeah, I don't know how much we understand what they want out of, and also not just what other people want, but what they would object to. You know, what would upset people, because a lot of these things, I guess, come down to people complaining about something that then can have quite a big impact on what you can and can't do. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be that they come and use your center, but as long as you're not doing anything that is specifically upsetting to them, it's probably also helpful. The other thing to remember is that Harrow has got 250,000, 260,000 people. The Salaam Centre is going to accommodate, what, 200, 2,000, but I don't know what's the... we're not aiming for everybody, right? We just need a tiny percentage of that 260,000 that we... And there's all sorts of other centres around providing various things. So I guess it's just about thinking, what should we be doing, and how does it fit in with what everybody else is doing, and who do we target, and etc. But yeah, it's not the same as, I guess, setting up a supermarket to try and reach everybody in Harrow, or yeah.
Talk. I know that you haven't looked at deprivation in particular, but I know with the sort of 2019 data, actually the sort of least deprived neighbourhoods in Harrow are actually falling. So, and you talked about white flight as well. And it might be a bit of racism, and it might be that they're moving away because ethnic people are moving in, but often it's also sort of a class thing as well. And if that was happening, you sometimes expect the sort of richer ethnic people to also start flying away as well. Is there any way, once you get the multivariate data, that you're going to be able to see if that's happening, whether the richer Hindus and Muslims are also starting to move out of Harrow, or would that not be possible?
So I think we will be able to see what kinds of people were here 10 years ago versus now, and get some sense of what's changed. And I mean, it's interesting if you look in East London, so some of the places like Newham and Tower Hamlets, which were very Bangladeshi and very deprived. A lot of those Bangladeshi people have made money and moved further east to places like Redbridge or even out into Essex, right? And so, so that's definitely been a trend on the east side of London. On the west side, yeah, it would be interesting to see what's the trajectory of those people. And I guess we can't move the building now. We've actually started to construct something. So.
I just wanted to ask, do you know, or do you have any sort of inclination of kind of other minor religions, for example, the Buddhists, how big they are in Harrow, or how sort of anti-Muslims they are, or anything like that? I mean, so they're supposed to be kind of non-violent religion and everything, but just wondering how fast are they growing in Harrow?
Yeah, so the reason I didn't put them on the slide was because they were very small. So in Harrow, those communities were very small, and I think generally what we've seen around the world is that they're not very keen on Muslims where they're in.
They have a center right across the road to us. So
oh, here?
Yeah,
okay.
The Peace House just down the road. So
right.
Just wondered if...
So maybe they're growing in terms of, like, from a very small number, they've become a slightly bigger number, but they're not tens of thousands of them or hundreds of thousands, yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're going to end there. Thank you very much. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Thank you.
Obviously, Miqdad will be around if you want to ask him any questions after that.
Brothers and sisters, we continue with our regular programs, and tomorrow we will be celebrating the Wiladat of Imam Ali alayhi salam. The program begins at 5:15 with Salah, followed by dinner. We'll have a Qari recitation by Hani al-Wardi and a Qasida by Muhammad Datu, and the main talk will be delivered by Imran Ali Panjwani. We also have a few extra new programs coming up. So tomorrow we start with ladies walking in the mornings. If you'd like to find out more, again, please either visit the website or speak to a member of the executive committee. We also start with ladies exercise classes, which are also new on Tuesday evenings. We start at 7:15. And we have a couple of extra programs coming up. So there's a paint night on Friday 19th and a quiz night Sorry, Friday 11th and February the 11th, and a quiz night coming up on February 19th. If you'd like to sign up to any of those or find out more, again, please look at the website or speak to a member of the executive committee.